So the reason why, in the spirit of the cheaper rebate, is to promote the demand for people to buy and or lease electric vehicles in the state of Connecticut, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so that's interesting. But at the same time, they're not allowing Tesla, as an example, Rivian, as an example, Lucid, as an example, to sell the cars in the state of Connecticut. So that just seems like it's totally a disconnect there. It seems super inconsistent. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're not wrong.
Welcome to another episode of Out of Spec Dave, where today I've got Barry Kresch on, who's the president of the EV Club of Connecticut, which is my home state. And, Barry and I, we talk quite often, and Barry's a data guy. And I love that about him because he likes to look at trends that are happening with EV adoption. He's very dialed into what's happening in government as far as the state goes. And we're an interesting state because you cannot buy a car directly from the manufacturer in this state. So if you want to buy a Lucid or a Rivian or a Tesla, you can't do it. You have to go buy it in another state. And what's interesting, and what I want you to think about, even if you don't live in the state of Connecticut, is there are many states in this country where dealer laws prevent direct-to-manufacturer sales efforts. So I thought it would be great to bring Barry on just to kind of provide a new update. Now it's the beginning of the year. We've got last year's data, and also just kind of pick his brain, say, hey, what's going on in this world? So with that, let's get into it and welcome Barry Kresch, president of the EV Club of America. I mean, of Connecticut.
Right.
Barry, thank you so much. Did you know that you are the EV Club president of America? I just indoctrinated you in a much bigger role, president of the EV Club of Connecticut. So welcome to the channel again, Barry.
Thank you. And I'm always looking to expand my horizons.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? So, so one of the things that you did the last time that we spoke, you had data from, I believe it was 2023, you had an interesting take at trying to sort of uncover and unveil where is the best place for a consumer to perhaps purchase an electric vehicle in the state of Connecticut. And what I thought you did was very interesting was you looked at the number of claims for the state vehicle rebate program that we call Cheaper here. And that sort of gave you information about where the majority of these cheaper rebates are coming from. Therefore, that's where the majority of the EV sales are happening. Can you maybe just expand that on that a little bit, and then we can take a look at the data for 2024?
Sure. So this was a project that I started about 5 years ago, and it came about because consumers would reach out to the EV Club, and the first thing they would do is start venting because they had a bad dealership experience, and we all know the reasons why that can happen.
Yep.
And after they got that off their chest, they would say, well, can you tell me where I should go? Because I'm still interested in the car. Can you give me a recommendation of a dealership where I ought to go to get it? Right. So, maybe I personally know 5 or 6 dealerships, but there are 270 of them in the state. And I certainly don't know anywhere near all of them. And so I had the idea to use the data that you can download through the Cheaper Purchase Incentive portal, and that indicates the dealership that awarded the rebate, that made the sale. And then I would just compare the dealers within each given make, and I could see which dealers were giving a lot of rebates and which ones weren't giving many. So there's an important limitation, which is that the incentive has an MSRP cap of $50,000. So if you're buying a BMW, it's not in my data set. But if you're buying a Chevy or a Hyundai, or a Kia, I will see the data.
Mm-hmm. And there's also, are there income limitations as well for the Cheaper?
Not with Cheaper, no.
Not with Cheaper. Okay.
That's federal.
That's federal, right? That I'm aware of. So it's just 50,000 MSRP, and the car either qualifies for it or it doesn't. And are you limited as a consumer as to the number of Cheaper rebates that you can get in your lifetime or over a period of time? How does that work?
Yes, you are. You can get 2 since they reset the program in 2021.
Okay, 2, and then once the money is out, if they reset it, who knows what may happen?
No, I don't expect that they're going to.
Okay.
When I say reset, I don't mean it in the sense of replenishing the funding, which happens on an ongoing basis. They have made a couple of significant rule changes since the program started in 2015, And in some cases they're tied to legislation, and that's what happened in 2021. So they kind of rebuilt the program, and they made some different rules for it. They made the MSRP cap 50,000 where it had been 42,000, and then they reset the counter for the number of rebates you could get. It had been 1, so they upped it to 2, but they allowed you to start from 0 if you had gotten 1 prior to 2021. So I hope that's not too confusing, but
no, it's totally confusing, which is par for the course. We're talking about the government here, right? So, but here's something that I may have brought up on our last call. If I didn't, I'm going to bring it up now. The reason why Connecticut is incentivizing people with this cheaper money, and it's $2,250. Is that right?
It changed in January.
Oh, it did.
So it's now $1,500 for a BEV.
For just a pure battery electric vehicle.
That's right.
Okay. All right. And then if it's a plug-in hybrid with 750. And then the plug-in hybrid, what does it have to have, like an 18 kilowatt hour battery pack or larger, something like that?
No, it could be anything.
Anything. Okay. But it has to be a plug-in, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection issued a document that was roughly 60 or 70 pages long, I think in 2019, called the EV Roadmap. And it has 100 different ideas about things they can do to promote EVs. There is not one mention of direct sales in that document.
It's just, so what is driving the reason for that? Tell me about the dealer, the power of the dealer, who issues licenses to dealers. I know you're an expert on this, but I think it's important for our viewers to understand what's really going on here behind the scenes. If I come up, you and I decide we're going to build a car, an electric car, and we're going to make it right here in the state of Connecticut, and we're going to sell it in the state of Connecticut. In order for us to sell that car, we have to have a dealer license, right? Who issues dealer licenses in the state of Connecticut?
DMV, as far as I know.
DMV, right. So why wouldn't the DMV issue a license to, for example, Tesla to sell cars in the state of Connecticut? Notwithstanding that Tesla kind of got around this, because where I took delivery of my Model 3 Performance was on tribal lands up at Mohegan Sun, I totally enjoyed doing that. What is your thoughts around why the DMV won't issue a license for, let's just say, Tesla to sell cars in the state of Connecticut? What's the rationale for that if they want people to buy electric cars?
Before I answer that, just one last point on the cheaper incentive changing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a good news, bad news story.
Okay.
The reason they lowered it is that the program is running hot and they're concerned about funds depletion, which is something that happened in New Jersey. It's happened on a repeated basis in New Jersey, where they run out of incentive funds 6 or 7 months into the year, and they end up suspending the program until they get the next tranche of funding. So they're just trying to manage the funds carefully. So it's good that people want to buy EVs and that they're giving out the incentives.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if they got some additional funding so they didn't have to diminish that. 80% of the incentive funds go to battery electric vehicles. So that's the one that they cut.
Yeah, and over the years, they've made it a lot more efficient for the consumer to take advantage of the cheaper rebate here in Connecticut. So, for example, years ago, I remember when I would buy electric cars here in the state, I had to file myself, or I had to fill out a form, and then the dealer would help me fill it out, and then I would have to get a check in the mail, I don't know, 2 months later. Now, it comes right off the price of the car at the point of sale, which is a lot easier for the consumer, right?
That's correct. There's a portal that the dealers have, and they just enter the information in there.
And then the state sends the money to them, and then you still have to pay sales tax on that amount of money, though, right?
You have to pay sales tax on the full amount. The state's not about to give up that revenue.
Right. Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I'm pretty sure I paid sales tax on the $2,250, the last one I got. I think I might have gotten one too many, and the state came back and said, "Dave, you need to write us a check," which I did. I didn't know there was a limit, nor did Tesla, quite honestly. So, yeah, I know a little bit about these rebates, but so tell me about
getting back to direct sales. So why doesn't the DMV issue a license? And the reason is that it's not up to the DMV. It has to do with the franchise laws. So many years ago, over 50 years ago, maybe closer to 70 years ago, the dealerships were able to get the state, and this is true in every state in the country, to pass a set of laws called the franchise laws, which require that a new vehicle be sold by a retailer who's independent of the manufacturer. And the reason for that happening was that dealers were fearful that they have invested, a significant amount of money to build up this business locally.
Mhm.
And what's to stop the manufacturer from giving a franchise to somebody else or themselves opening up a franchise across the street and significantly damaging their business?
Right.
Now, and there's an argument to be made why that couldn't have been handled contractually, but the politicians went along with this, and so those laws were written. They do vary slightly from state to state, but the basic idea is the same. It's to protect the dealership from their own affiliated manufacturer. But since the language specifies that a vehicle has to be sold by an independent entity, that language has been repurposed to use against companies like Rivian or Tesla who would like to open stores and sell directly.
I see.
So they would be required to retail their cars through a dealership or open a new dealership.
Right. However, we just have a brand new service center here in Stamford from Tesla. So it's okay for them to service the cars, but not sell them. Is that right?
It's legal to have service centers. It's
Okay.
also legal to have leasing centers. So if you go to one of the Tesla service centers and you say, I'm interested in leasing a vehicle, you can then get a test drive. You can also do the paperwork there, but you can't take delivery of the vehicle because delivery is bundled up with sales in the law.
Wow. Okay. If you're not confused yet, I am. I mean, that it's like, no, you did an excellent job of explaining that. Really did, Barry. And I just think that to me, I guess I understand if someone owns a dealer and they build their beautiful dealership and they've got their bricks and mortar, and then all of a sudden it's like McDonald's, right? McDonald's has some corporate stores and they've got franchise stores, but they're careful about where they place them so that they don't cannibalize each other. The thing about car manufacturers, though, is that, or car consumers, is I, as a car consumer, am somewhat indifferent as to where I buy the car. I'm always looking for the best deal. I mean, I'd rather buy it locally and get a relationship with my local dealer. That'd be a nice to have, but that's not my driving force. So I think there are a lot of factors at play when it comes to making a major purchase as opposed to a double cheeseburger. So still important, but that's interesting about the franchise laws. Let's talk about this cheaper data for 2024. So if you are looking to buy an EV in the state of Connecticut, even though I took delivery in the past of Tesla in Mount Kisco, New York, I was able to still get the cheaper Connecticut rebate, even though I took delivery of it outside the state, which I found interesting. So it's not as if I was penalized by not being able to buy the car at all. I could get it. I could still get that cheaper rebate. But specific to dealers that are selling EVs in Connecticut, let's bring up the chart that you compiled for 2024, and maybe you can explain this a little bit.
So there are a number of charts in this blog post, and the first one is just the number of rebates by make, and I left Tesla off the chart. Tesla accounts for most of the rebates, but there are no dealerships involved, so that was not the point of the blog post.
Mm-hmm.
So there were only 5 makes that had cheaper eligible vehicles and gave out over 100 rebates. Right, those were Toyota, Kia, Chevy, Hyundai, and Subaru. And keep in mind that the plug-in hybrids are included in these numbers. Right, so in the case of Toyota, the majority of the rebates are going to plug-in hybrids, and the majority of those are going to the RAV4. Getting a dealer to sell an electric vehicle, it doesn't really matter whether it's a plug-in hybrid or a BEV. If they sell one, they sell the other.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went into the individual makes, and then I broke it out by dealership. So I looked at dealership within make because I wanted to compare like to like.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'm only looking at new vehicles, so you can get a cheaper rebate for a used vehicle, but it's only for consumers below a certain income level.
Okay.
Right. So, and it only accounts for about 1% of the rebates given out by the program.
Right.
And what I saw this year is what I hoped not to see. Mm-hmm. What I would like to see is that every dealer is doing a great job of selling EVs. right? And what I see is that some are doing a very good job and a lot are not.
Mhm.
And we need everybody to be doing a good job. You know, our EV club is brand agnostic. We want to see everybody who buy a car, everyone who buys a car buy an EV, but we don't care which EV they buy. That's up to them. We just want to see the best possible consumer experience, which is a dealer who is invested in selling an EV isn't going to try and switch pitch a consumer to an ICE vehicle, you know, has a vehicle charged up and ready to go, has charging facilities on premises, and, you know, all that stuff that makes for a good transaction.
Right.
Right. And similarly with direct sales, you know, there are consumers that don't like the dealership experience and would prefer to do business that way. They like the pricing transparency that you can get, the consistency of the experience. And so when we say that we support direct sales, it's not to be construed that we're anti-dealer. We think the two can coexist. And importantly, we think that if we had direct sales, and I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but if we had direct sales, you know, we think it would make the dealership step up their game.
Right.
They have to. So getting back to the dealership data, like the previous year, even though there was a higher number of rebates given out, there's still quite a big disparity. So with Chevrolet, the dealer that had the most rebates gave out 54. The dealer that had the least gave out 1. And probably there were a couple of dealers that had 0. It's just that if a dealer had no rebates, it's not going to be in the file, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't see them.
Right.
In the case of some of the other big brands, Hyundai, the top dealer had 62. The lowest dealer had 2. Kia, the top had 86. The lowest had 1. You know, so you get the idea that there was a tremendous range and there was a continuum, so that there were maybe 4 to 6 that did pretty well, and then, you know, 8 or 10 that did poorly.
So quick question for you. You know, some of the dealers some companies own multiple dealers, like Stanford, Hyundai, Stanbury, I think is the same owner. Are those numbers that you're quoting in aggregate by dealer consortium groups, or are they specific locations, even if they're owned by the same ownership team?
They're specific locations.
Specific locations. Okay. And I think that's good. I'm sharing the the screenshots here, and so people can kind of see that. And I think that's a creative way to think about things here. So hats off to you for doing that.
Well, that is exactly the leap of faith that I'm making, that this is a good proxy for EV friendliness. So almost every year, a bill gets submitted to the Connecticut legislature to legalize direct sales. And the way it usually would work is that it would apply to any manufacturer that doesn't have an existing dealership network, right? So it's a pretty simple, straightforward definition.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes that bill will get raised by the committee chair, meaning that it gets turned over to staff to draft the specific language of the bill, and a public hearing is held, a committee vote is held, and then if it passes out of committee, it goes before the full chamber, where it may or may not get called for a vote. Bills tend not to get called for a vote if they don't know ahead of time that they're going to pass. So over the years, there have been many such bills introduced, but the last time a bill passed out of committee was 2022. There have been bills introduced in every year subsequent to that, including this year. The one that has been submitted this year has not been raised to this point. There's so far only one hearing that's been scheduled by the Transportation Committee. And out of 100 or so bills that have been submitted, the hearing, which takes place, actually it took place earlier this week, only covered 11 bills. So there are a lot of bills every year that get proposed that don't go anywhere. That seems to be the case this year. I wrote to the co-chair of the Transportation Committee, Senator Cohen, and asked if the committee was going to seriously consider raising this bill, but I have not gotten a response.
Right.
Maybe you ought to take a shot.
It seems to me that the state is, on one hand, encouraging the adoption of EVs, but on the other hand, they're discouraging the adoption of EVs. Is there something going on here? Because I've heard a lot of people say to me, and I'm just going to be blatant here and say this: dealer lobbies are very strong, and perhaps there is a disincentive to government officials to introduce a bill because of reasons that the dealers may not want them to do that. Am I off base here? I mean, I hear this. I'm just repeating what I hear from a lot of people.
Well, that's exactly the reason. It's very simple. The dealerships are very opposed to it. They don't want the competition, and they're in a sense an ideally situated industry for lobbying, right? Because they're spread throughout many communities in the state. They have relationships with a lot of the legislators. They donate a lot of money. And they have the backing of the manufacturers and the manufacturers trade association. So they're extremely well financed, just beyond their own local resources. So they are a potent lobbying force, and thus far they've been able to prevent enactment of a direct sales bill. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because there have been multiple studies where we have seen the overall levels of EV adoption increase substantially in states where direct sales is legal, right? We've seen it in a study that Bloomberg did a few years ago, where the rate of adoption was 3 to 4 times in states that had direct sales without any restriction. And that's just another nuance, is that there are different flavors of direct sales. Some states allow it but limit it. Other states allow it but don't cap it. And if you look at the
New York State, right, for example, they try and buy a car up until recently in upstate New York. How do you do that?
So in the case of New York, Tesla and the dealerships were encouraged to sit down and negotiate by the legislators, and they came to an agreement. And this probably goes back about 10 years now. I don't remember exactly when. And that agreement allowed Tesla to open up something like 5 stores. And Tesla wasn't selling that many cars back then. So all of the stores that Tesla opened in New York State are downstate. They're all either in New York City or Westchester or Long Island.
Right.
And so if you go north of Westchester, it's a desert, right? There's just nothing there, except that they recently opened up a sales center on tribal land in the Syracuse area.
In the states that did allow direct-to-sales model, it didn't just increase sales of EVs for the direct-to-sales models. It increased the sales of EVs at the dealers as well, right?
I don't have that level of data for the other state. I suspect that it did. It increased overall sales by so much that it would be hard to believe that the dealerships didn't step up and start doing a better job. Sure. One final point about that New York example, So that negotiation took place between Tesla and the dealerships, right? There was no Rivian at the time.
Right.
Right. So it only applies to them. And as far as I know, Rivian can't open a store in New York. They have a service center in Rockland County, and they have a distribution center in Brooklyn.
They just opened a store, I believe I got the email today, in White Plains.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yeah. Rivian, join us at our new White Plains space. Hello, White Plains. We're getting excited for the opening of our new space in White Plains on February 14th. They're going to be at the mall, at the Rivian at the Westchester. Which actually is interesting because Tesla used to be in there, but they're no longer in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it also bears worth mentioning that there are 2 new companies that are backed by legacy manufacturers that have said the dealership model doesn't work and they're going direct sales, right? So that's Scout, which is backed by Volkswagen, and Afila, which is a joint venture of Honda and Sony. So the dealerships for Volkswagen and Honda are already in court, and we'll see where that lands. But the CEOs of those companies were very clear about why they're doing this, and they're doing it because the dealers aren't able to do a good enough job, in their opinion.
Right. Now, a few years back, let's talk about what Ford was doing, because I know you and I talked about that earlier with their program. What was it called?
It's called Model E.
Model E, right.
Right. So Ford introduced this program where they tried to introduce certain minimum sales practices and standards for selling EVs without crossing the line and violating the franchise laws. Right. So with the franchise laws, the price is up to the dealer. Right. The MSRP is what the manufacturer suggests. But as you know, you can walk into any dealership and the price can be either higher or lower than that MSRP. And that's enshrined in the franchise law. But what Ford wanted to do was have more pricing transparency. And there were some rules around it. I don't remember exactly what they were, but they wanted, they required the dealerships to display the price in a more transparent manner than they typically do. They also required a certain amount of charging equipment on premises.
Right. And it was expensive to put that in. It was an investment for the dealer.
Right, because it was level 3 that they
Yeah, that's right. It was DC fast charging, not just level 2s. So
right. I mean, the dealers threw around a lot of very big numbers in terms of complaining about the size of the expense, but there were also some pretty substantial rebates that would have helped significantly, which they didn't bother to talk about.
Right.
And it also required valet service, so they would pick up your car to bring it in for service and deliver it to you. So there were a lot of customer-friendly things that dealers aren't required to do and often don't do today. And the dealers were not happy with this program.
Yeah.
Maybe the thought of investing in that much charging equipment was the reason, but I think it also had to do with the pricing transparency.
What is your feeling about the government saying, hey, listen, we need to have X amount of vehicles on the road as EVs by a certain date, and then doing whatever they can to manipulate or incentivize or whatever you want to call it with dollars, whether it's at the manufacturer level or the consumer level, as opposed to allowing the market itself to create products that consumers just want. And the curve ends up being the curve because of the demand rather than an artificial sort of economic incentive to push to a number that someone says this is what it should be for X amount of reasons. I'm curious to your thoughts on what I just said.
So I think that is a deceptively complicated question. So if we say, well, let's just leave it to the free market, well, how do we define the free market? Is the free market a market that doesn't have direct sales, for example? Or is it a free market that doesn't subsidize fossil fuels and keep the price of gasoline artificially low?
Mm-hmm.
So the reason the state is setting goals is because they have ambitions to get the state to net zero by 2050 or whatever it is, right? And so a lot of policies flow from that, and transportation is the sector with the largest emissions. Mm-hmm. So there's quite a lot of focus on electric vehicles for that reason. So So from my perspective, I think it's fine to give consumers a purchase incentive, and I think it's fine to have policies that are supportive of EVs, including direct sales. We need to get more charging infrastructure out there. So I don't think you want to have incentives out there forever. And I think you need to have certain controls around them, because a badly designed incentive will be counterproductive, which is what I think you were hinting at. Somebody could put up a charger in the middle of nowhere with no amenities and not maintain it.
Right.
Right. And you had, in the case of the California rules, which required the manufacturer of a certain minimum number of electric vehicles, we had what became known as compliance cars. Right. So not to point fingers, but, you had the Subaru Crosstrek, right, which had a battery pack that would get you about 15 miles of range, right? What's the point?
Right.
Right. Or vehicles, or the infamous remark of the late chairman of Fiat Chrysler when he came out with the 500e and said, "Don't buy it because I lose money on every car."
Oh, yeah. Oh boy.
So, I think that there was a lot of thought that went into the IRA that gave incentives for building manufacturing capacity in America. So that was for job creation, revitalizing the industrial base, moving the supply chain over to this country to reduce our dependence upon China, and so from that perspective, I think all of those are good things, and I think that the purpose was number one, to speed adoption, because we are in a climate crisis, and the faster we can reduce emissions, the better off we will be. But then the IRA had these other purposes as well related to industrial policy.
Before we go into the adoption numbers, what's your feeling on the $7,500 federal tax credit going away?
I think it will be very disruptive for the manufacturers who have invested in trying to stand up these new car factories and battery factories. I think it will slow consumer adoption because EVs are still a little more expensive than gasoline vehicles. I don't know how hopeful I should be, but probably not very hopeful that the incentive will survive.
Today, I think we just saw this new potential bill being launched about at the federal level, $1,000 per EV car being sold, and that seems like a disproportionate tax, especially up front for a car that. How long would it take you to accumulate with the gas tax? Let's just say that you pay at the pump if you drive a car 12,000 miles a year. What's the break even on $1,000? It's got to be way more than 5 years, wouldn't you think?
Well, one of the senators who's behind the bill said it's 10 years, but
10 years.
But the data that I've seen would indicate that it's longer than 10 years because $80 or $85, I believe, is about what a consumer would typically pay in gas taxes over the course of a year, for
Right.
like a median car.
Huh. And the money for that was what, for the federal highway systems? Is that what that is being targeted towards?
Well, there's no bill yet. It's just a proposal.
Right. But the concept would be to use that money because the EVs are going down the road and wearing, tearing on the roads, but they're not contributing to maintaining them. Is that what it's for?
Yes, that's what it's for. I don't really buy the argument in the terms of the way that they frame it. I think that the reason the transportation funds are experiencing shortfalls is that so this was a federal proposal. So in the case of the federal gas tax, it hasn't been raised since 1993. Right, it's not 18 or 19 cents. So these gas taxes are not indexed to inflation. We've had the CAFE fuel economy standards, and so people driving gas cars are paying less and less in gas taxes. And unfortunately, highway construction costs have risen. In fact, they've risen faster than the rate of inflation, according to an analysis that was done at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And so now you're running into these shortfalls, and with electric vehicles making up maybe 1% of the fleet nationwide, in a state like Connecticut, maybe it's 2%. The impact of EVs on these transportation funds is de minimis at this point. When EVs are 10 or 20% of the fleet, then they'll start to matter. Mm-hmm. So I would say the first thing we should do is raise the gas tax, right? Let's make some adjustments for the fact that it hasn't been raised, for the fact that that burning gasoline is incredibly destructive to the environment and to public health. And that's where I would go first, and then take some time to think about how we want to phase in some kind of tax or other sort of revenue for EVs. I mean, there have been proposals for mileage taxes. In the current political environment, there's always the fear that the nature of the tax that will be imposed will be punitive and will retard EV adoption. So I just think it's a bigger question than blaming EVs for the shortfalls in the transportation.
Yeah, interesting. Let's jump over to the chart that you created, which showed the number of EVs going back, and then what you've calculated for, what seems like a relatively steep curve to be able to hit the EV adoption levels that were proposed for, what is it, year 2030?
Right. So a little bit of background about what's in here. So the dark line is trend data from the past. Then the orange dot is where we were in January of 2024. We are waiting for the release of the data for January of 2025. Usually it's out by the end of January, but it's still not out, and it's February 12th. Right. So hopefully it will be out soon. What I did at that point was I took the state's goal of 500,000 EVs by 2030 compared to where we are now, and I calculated the compound annual growth rate that would be necessary to get where we need to be. So that's what this is. It's different than a projection. Right, because I'm not trying to forecast what car sales will be. Maybe they'll exceed this, maybe they'll lag it, but this is where we would need to be. And the reason that it gets so steep is that if you have a constant CAGR of roughly 45% is what it works out to be, and then you apply that to a higher and higher base every year, you get a curve that steepens quickly.
Yeah.
So that's what you're looking at, and this is net registrations. It's not sales.
Okay.
Right. So this takes into account used cars. It takes into account somebody moving into the state who already owns an EV, and vice versa, turnover of vehicles. So it's a registered EVs, which is what the state goal is tied to.
So there's double counting there. If someone buys a car new, they sell it 2 years later, and it goes into the used market, gets registered, it will be counted twice, correct?
Well, not really. Both cars are. If that happens, then both cars are registered, so it should be counted twice.
No, I'm saying if it's the same car. So in other words, I buy a car in 2021,
Right.
I sell that car in 2023, and someone registers that same car in 2023. That's only one car, but it's
That
two.
car would be counted once. What would
Okay, that car would be counted once.
Right. What I don't know is after you sold the car, what you bought. So if you bought
Right.
an
Well,
EV,
yeah, most, maybe not all, but a lot of people, once they go EV, they stay with the EV. And we bounce back. We've bounced back and forth, Kathy and I, over the years, but I think we're pretty much all EV now. For the foreseeable future. I don't anticipate us going back unless it's maybe 3-pedal Porsche with a 911 number on it. Maybe we'll see, but that's a different topic. A little blurb about the EV Club of Connecticut, and if someone wanted to get involved, how would they do that?
So just in terms of our mission to evangelize EVs, even though we've talked a lot about policy and a little about politics, our club is essentially not political. For us, it's about cars. And our mission is to be a source of information for people who are shopping for an EV or considering an EV, and to get people in an EV to at least test drive them. So we try and support all of the EV showcases that occur around the state in the spring and the fall, usually around Drive Electric Week, which this year has been turned into Drive Electric Month.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of sustainability committees in towns around the state, which normally would put on green fairs, are now adding EV showcases onto those events. And we try and support them by getting EV owners in that area to bring their cars to exhibit and to talk to people. And then, of course, the EV Club does its own event, which we've been doing in September. We had a very successful event last year where we had several hundred people join us, and we had test drives at the event with half a dozen brands, and we gave out 250 test drives. So that all worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it was a great event. I loved being there. It was amazing, and people were really, really excited. It was fun to see, the people that drive the EVs and talking to people that have never even, thought about an EV. And yeah, they were just going to IKEA and they saw all these EVs there, and they were popping in just saying, "What is going on here?" And I think the Cybertruck test drives really helped stop a lot of traffic that day. That was fun.
Right, but it's great that the hotel and IKEA, which is a pretty busy IKEA, share this parking lot, and so you can see the solar canopies that are up. And IKEA is pretty sustainability minded. If you're up on an upper floor of the hotel, you can see the building is covered in solar panels. Yeah, and they have their own chargers.
It's an amazing facility, that hotel, and the owner there is he's a great man, and I love how he supports that event, and what a great time getting to know him this past couple of years has been.
Right, so I guess we can say out loud that it is the Hotel Marcel in New Haven.
Yep.
And for anyone who wants to get involved with the EV Club, we have a website. It's evclubct.com, and there's a contact form on the website. And if you send us your information, we'll add it to our distribution. There's no cost. We'll teach you the secret handshake.
Yeah, you still haven't taught me the secret handshake yet, Barry. I don't know about that, but
you're a busy guy. Hard to get a hold of.
Well, I know it's true. Well, this has been great, and thank you so much. I appreciate it. Please, for anyone that wants to get in touch with the EV Club of Connecticut, I'll put the link below. Please join. There's a great group of guys and gals, and they're very supportive and they're very helpful. And I know we did talk a lot about policy and politics and money and government and all that, but you know what? At the end of the day, this is a fun group of people that you can learn. And if you just want to understand about an EV, go for a ride. These people are so super helpful in this club. And I think in general, even when you go, sometimes, I don't know about you, Barry, but sometimes when I'm just charging at a Tesla supercharger or an EA or what have you, I see people in their gas cars just kind of looking over. And I go, "Hey, do you have any questions?" And yeah, I'm just watching, I'm just learning. And I love helping people that are maybe dreaming a little bit or thinking about what's it like to make the move over to EVs. And I commend you and the team at the EV Club of Connecticut, and for what you do to help do that. So anyway, Barry, thanks again for this time, and really appreciate all of the updates. And as things happen throughout the year, please reach out to me, and we'll make another video. I know this one went pretty long, but that's okay. There was a lot to talk about. So thanks again, everyone, for watching another episode of Out of Spec Dave. Barry, thanks for coming on, and we'll catch you. You're very welcome. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.